Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is training, and we're going to discuss technique is the limiting factor. So this has come up quite recently with various clients myself or clients of the trainers I work with, where one of the main reasons why the person isn't getting the results that they want, despite the fact that they're actually putting in effort, is their technique quality. So people are going to the gym, or they're working out at home, but they're putting in effort, and it just doesn't seem to be leading to what they want. And overwhelmingly, like I said, it's kind of been coming up here recently, is I've been seeing more and more just that it's as simple as, which is also a very complex thing, but it's as simple as their technique is just not very good. So one example would be somebody who lifts too perfectly. And what I mean by that is they are doing the movement, but they're so crisp, so controlled that they're not actually causing any stress to their current body. Now, this is typically more females than males, but it has absolutely happened both ways. So, but they'll come into the gym and they're doing, say bent over rows or chest presses or, an exercise that's a good quality exercise, something that should produce results, but it's not for them. They don't seem to be getting bigger muscles. They don't seem to be getting better shape. They don't seem to be getting the fat loss that they want. And what's end up happening is they're coming into the gym and they're moving around. They're active, but they're not creating any damage to their muscles. So they're doing the lift so cleanly, so perfectly, that their current body isn't being challenged beyond its current limits. Therefore, it's not producing new muscle tissue. So they'll do a set of, say, 10 reps, and they'll say, oh, that was really hard. And it's like, yeah, I understand what you mean by that, in the sense that it felt difficult to do. But nothing in what you just did in those 10 reps would require your current body to fix, change, or adjust in order to do 10 more reps, or in order to come back and do that again. So typically in regular training, what we're looking to do is safely, we're looking to damage the muscle tissue of our current body. We want to beat up our body so much, okay, again, this is safely, we want to beat up our body so much that it goes home and says, holy crap, if we ever do that again, I need to be more prepared. I need to build some new muscle tissue. I need to, maybe balance out the muscle. I need to do whatever the training dictated me to do. So we've talked about in past podcasts that there are time under tension ranges for exercises. So for example, an exercise can be done for, say, 20 seconds. And what result that creates is typically kind of a blend of increased strength and increased muscle damage. Now, if you're eating in a caloric surplus, that muscle damage will result in muscle growth. If you're eating in caloric maintenance or you're actually dieting, it'll result in better muscular shape, or what people call toning the muscle. So in podcast 214, we discuss that aspect of different time under tensions for exercises and what result that'll lead the body to make, like change-wise. So if I do an exercise, say I'm doing dumbbell rows, and I do that for 60 seconds, that's going to improve. So it's a very hard set of dumbbell rows, and by the time I reach 60 seconds, I simply cannot move anymore. I'm maxed out. It's the best I can do at that weight is 60 seconds. Our body will respond by increasing its ability for muscular endurance, not strength. It won't necessarily make me stronger at doing rows. It'll just make me better able to do rows for a long period of time, say 60 seconds. Whereas if I do dumbbell rows or cable rows or any type of row, and I only do it for 10 seconds, so within 10 seconds the muscle's absolutely dead, it can't move anymore, that actually produces strength. That does not produce endurance, because 10 seconds isn't something that's an endurance-based activity, but it is a strength-based activity. So if you go to the gym and you do things that cause your muscles to fail within, say, 10 to 20 seconds at each exercise, that's going going to promote your body to make a response based on strength. It'll increase its strength. Whereas if you do exercises that fail, okay, that reach full muscular challenge at 60 seconds, as we said, that's going to produce results related to endurance. The body's going to try to get better at enduring the event rather than trying to lift something heavier for the event. So, what your time under tension range is for an exercise is extremely important to make sure you get the body response that you want. Whether you want the body response of strength, whether you want the body response of endurance, whether you want the body response of, say, muscular damage. And then when you're eating in excess, you grow from that damage. When you're eating controlled, you just get more toned and shaped muscles. Okay? So that's what's very, very, very important is in your training, that you're training to the right time under tension ranges. Now, with all of those in place now in our mind, those only matter if what you did was actually to muscular failure. So if you do an exercise for 10 seconds and you just stop, and you really could have done it for 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 seconds, okay, but you just stop at 10 because you heard 10 was strength, that does not produce strength. Okay? The exercise needs to be taken to muscular failure. The body needs to fail at what you're trying to do. So that way it has the response of, wow, my current body couldn't do what I was asked to do. Let me build a new body. So that's how we get progress from our training. Okay? The training needs to create a level of stress that requires the body to adjust to that stress. So when somebody has really perfect technique, okay, there actually is too perfect. Yes, somebody can be too perfect in their technique, meaning that they want every rep to look absolutely perfect as if they were filming a tutorial for video, for YouTube or something. And that's not a bad thing, but if you just stop at the very instant your body gets slightly out of position or slightly challenged and you just stop, that's not muscular failure. So this has happened several times over the years where I've had clients where they'll be doing an exercise and they'll just say stop at 12. And I'll go, oh, you okay? I'll be shocked for a second. I'm like, are you okay? Is there something wrong? And they're like, no, I just couldn't do anymore. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah, you could. So you could do way more than that. So we had to start to actually learn. So they had to be taught what was still good enough for them, that it was safe, but they needed to push their muscles harder. So in those cases, I usually get into a little game we call pretty reps versus ugly reps. So they want to do a set of 10 reps that are all pretty. However, you have to have muscular stress, muscular challenge, muscular damage to grow from anything, okay, in the gym. So we have to get into some quote-unquote ugly reps. So we have to get some reps that aren't quite the fullest range of motion, or some reps that maybe require a little extra kind of body English, a little bit of leg momentum or a little bit of postural momentum. There has to be something where the body is starting to break down form-wise. Now, there is a risk of getting injured if you don't know where that line stops. So you don't ever want any spinal twisting, for example. So if you're trying to press dumbbells overhead and you're stronger in your right arm, so your right arm can lock out but your left arm can't, you sure as hell do not lock out the right arm and leave the left arm bent. And now all of a sudden you have dumbbells over your head, your spine's kind of twisted or crooked, and that can absolutely cause some injury. So you never want to have spinal kind of side-to-side bending or spinal twisting that is outside the normal movement of that exercise. So you have to be careful of that. So we think of it as a bicep curl. If you think of the full range of a bicep curl, okay, from your arm being like 99.999% extended. You want to keep it slightly bent at the bottom, so that way there's still muscular tension rather than the joint just being like relaxed open. So you want to have muscular tension at the bottom. You would then curl all the way up till you're making a full flexed bicep muscle, right? So that range of motion, let's just say it's 8 inches of range of motion. So as something gets heavier, maybe this next rep I only move 7 inches of range of motion. That's still enough workload that the muscle had to do something, and it'll be damaged by that, it'll be challenged by that. But now it's no longer pretty. So instead of the 8 inches of range of motion, I only got 7. And too often people will just stop there. They'll do one ugly rep and stop. So what we've done in the past is I've helped them learn pretty reps versus ugly reps. So I'll have them do a set of 10, and I'll say, how many of those were pretty, how many were ugly? And they'll say, oh, I think, all 10 were pretty. And I'm like, yep, okay, we got to do more. So we either have to add weight or we have to try for more reps. So maybe they're not like feeling confident to add weight. So I'll say, okay, let's try a set of 14. So now all of a sudden they go for 14, and they can get all 14, but they're like, yeah, 10 of them looked pretty again, but the last 4 were ugly. And I'm like, that's great. That means they're going to grow. So that's what limits some people, is the fact that they do not lift heavy enough. They don't lift aggressive enough. They don't lift with enough challenge to their technique. So technique for them is a limiter because it's too perfect. They're too concerned with every little nuance of technique that they never allow their body to actually struggle. The reason why this is really important is if their body doesn't struggle, it doesn't create muscular damage. If you don't have muscular damage, you don't have muscular change. The body will not change the shape of the muscle. It won't change the size of the muscle. It won't change the tone, whatever you want to have happen to the muscle, okay? So nothing will change in the muscle if there's no muscular damage. Also, if you don't have any muscular damage from your training, you're not going to burn as many calories during the recovery period of training. So in podcast 181, we discuss using muscle damage for fat loss. You can actually use the process of the body recovering from muscle damage to help you burn more calories at rest, and that'll actually help you lose fat, body fat. So if you create muscular damage in training, you can actually lose body fat because your body is burning calories to repair those muscles. But if there's no damage, there's no repair, there's no calories being burned. So as soon as you stop the activity, your calorie burn stops. This happens, unfortunately, all the time. As I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and they were doing this like boot camp style training that was body weight or very lightly weighted. And what happened was the structure of the training is they were busy for 30 minutes, but then as soon as they stopped exercising, they stopped burning calories. Because what they were doing in their training was not aggressive enough to cause muscular damage. The downside was the people who host a boot camp were lying to them and saying that it absolutely did. So they either don't know the science or they're assholes and they're lying to people. I'm hoping it's the first. Okay, so, but unfortunately people will be busy. They'll do activities. But as soon as they stop the activity, they stop the calorie burn because there was no muscle damage in the activity. So listen to podcast 181 and you can find out how if you work out to create muscular damage and you do it correctly, you can actually eat more calories throughout the day and be leaner throughout the day due to that recovery process of the muscle damage. Okay? So that's one example where technique is too perfect, and that is causing a limitation in someone's progress. Another example we have is strength training. So if you think of somebody who does like strongman, powerlifting, or they just want to be stronger. So they don't have to do necessarily a sport for strength, but their focus is strength. So one example is people who, a limiting factor for them would be even in their performance. So people will go to a powerlifting meet. And at a powerlifting meet, which is a powerlifting competition, they have to try for a 1 rep max on squat, bench, and deadlift. So the most that they can do for 1 rep on squat, bench, and deadlift. And in front of the judges, they get 3 attempts. So, of course, they're going to warm up backstage, but then in front of the judges, they're going to have 3 attempts to kind of show how much they can do. The problem with this is if their technique is not consistent, they'll have a really freaking hard time knowing how to pick the right numbers for their events. So if they go out for the squat and their technique is off on the first squat because of nerves, so they kind of get out of position, it's a really rough rep, it didn't go very well, they kind of got maybe pushed forward, tilted forward into their toes, so their lower back had a lot of stress throughout that lift. So they're going to say, holy crap, that was really heavy, that was really hard. I'm only going to make a small increase for my second attempt. Since the first one was successful, but maybe it was really hard, I don't want to take a big jump in weight. I'm just going to take a small jump. But maybe for their second one, they have excellent technique and it's right on point, and they destroy it, they smoke it. And they're like, oh, holy crap, that was so much easier. I'm going to make a big jump now for my third. And then on the third one, it's heavy, they get back to being nervous, and all of a sudden their form goes back to shit, and then they die on the third attempt. So, not literally, but they'll get to the bottom of the attempt, if it's a squat or a bench, and they just can't move, they can't do it, and they kind of look like an idiot because it looked like they picked something that was way beyond their reach. So that's something you'll see, is with inconsistent technique, they're going to have inconsistent sensations after each attempt, and therefore not know what weights to pick. So same person can sometimes have a great first attempt, but then they're out of position on their second attempt, so they can only make a small jump for their third, but then the third attempt they have great technique, and all of a sudden they smoke it, and they're like, oh, I should have done more, I wish I did more, or I left pounds on the platform, or whatever bullshit excuse they want. So that happens all the time, is their technique is going to limit how well they can show their strength. So yes, they might have had more strength, but they don't have the consistency and technique to show that strength. So their technique is the limiter in their performance. They may be very strong, but they don't have good technique, so therefore they're never going to perform to their absolute best. So for them, they need to focus more on consistency than weight in their training. They need to train at whatever weight that they can do perfectly from rep to rep to rep. To where if you were to film 5 reps, you wouldn't know which was the first, which was the third, which was the 5th. So whereas in the first person we mentioned, okay, the people who lift too perfect, and we said that there are commonly more women than men, they are so perfect they're not getting any muscle damage, and therefore they're not going to get results. In strength training, they do need perfect technique, so they can display their absolute best strength safely and consistently. So what they're lifting is so damn heavy that even if they get it perfect, it's still going to stress the muscles, okay? So they're getting muscle damage because they're trying to squat, twice their body weight, or bench over their body weight, or deadlift, 2.5 to 3 times their body weight. They're trying to lift very heavy weights. So even if they do it perfect, they're still going to get muscular damage. And it's a requirement that they do it perfect so they stay safe, and they can actually show their truest strength. So that way they don't end up squatting only, say, 405 in a meet when they really could have done 425 if their technique had been better. So for people in that scenario, they actually need to make their technique perfect. Whereas people in the first scenario, they need to get away from perfect technique. So technique can be your limiting factor in either way. It depends on what you need to get from what you're doing. So that's why it's really important to know what your goal requires. Does your goal require ugly reps? Or does your goal require every rep to look perfect? That's very, very, very important to understand. And not a lot of people understand this, unfortunately. So they're going to be doing strength-based lifts that all look like absolute shit, and they all look different from each other. And then they wonder why they can't ever do their best, or why they have nagging aches and pains, so their knee's going to always hurt when they squat, because they're dumping their knees forward at the bottom and overextending into their, patella tendon. So, or you have somebody who's like, my back always hurts because they're deadlifting with their head straight up, and they're squeezing the lockout through their lower back rather than squeezing through their butt. So they're just focused so much on strength, they just lift stupid heavy things in a stupid way, and then they wonder why their body feels like shit, okay? Whereas people who want aesthetic changes, Sometimes they'll lift too pretty, too perfect. And then they wonder why they don't get enough results is because they don't have enough muscular damage from what they're doing. So it's very important to understand, what does your goal dictate technique-wise? What kind of technique do you require? And then are you doing technique correctly for that goal? So now that you know what it's required, does it require ugly reps or does it require perfect reps? And are you doing that? So another thing that we talk about technique being limitation is, think of aesthetic athletes. So if they want to build their upper chest, but they don't have themselves, their shoulder blades pulled back and down when they do incline presses, okay, and they don't hold the dumbbells out wide enough, and they pretty much just hold them straight above their shoulder joints. When they do incline presses, they're pretty much just going to be growing their front delt and triceps instead of their upper chest. So they might be the exact right exercise, the exact right angle of the bench. They're doing everything right position and exercise-wise. But they're not doing it technique-wise. So they'll go to muscular failure. They'll lift heavy. They'll do the best they can. So if their goal is muscle growth, they're going to do muscle damage. So maybe they're going to do 20 to 30-second sets. Really heavy-based, muscle damage-based training. But they're using the wrong damn muscles. They're using the front delt and triceps rather than the chest. So we see this in back training all the freaking time. So people will want to train their back, and especially say mid-back, to get some detail along this, like the lower traps, the rhomboids, kind of the mid-back along the spine. But when they're doing back training, they lock their shoulders in place, and they never have their shoulder blades extend. So their shoulder blades never extend and retract. They just stay locked in place. So the person ends up building really big biceps, and maybe they have like really good upper traps, but they have no lats, no mid-back, because they never let their shoulders freaking move. So we see that all the time, unfortunately, where someone will be saying, oh, I'm training my back, and then you look at it and it's just a very elaborate bicep curl, okay? So that happens. There's women who train glutes. They want to build a booty pop, okay? They want to get their glutes popping, but unfortunately, they're only doing things for the upper part of the glute. So maybe overly heavy, fully locked out and extended, like RDLs or stiff leg deadlifts. So I've seen elite, quote-unquote, level trainers who they're training women for aesthetic shows, and all they're doing is building the upper outer portions of their butt. They're never really getting them a booty pop. And it's because that trainer doesn't understand the exercise selections. So, and then whenever you do the exercise, do you contract through your lower back? Do you contract through your upper hamstrings and lower glutes? Do you even stand up all the way? So for RDLs and stiff leg deadlifts, it's better to actually not fully lock out the hips at the top. Okay? Especially if you don't have any banding on the exercises. You want to keep the hip joint slightly loose at the top. So that way the hamstrings and lower glutes are still holding the weight at the top, rather than locking out the hip joint, which loads the upper glutes and lower back. So technique is insanely important. And you can see how just now we've talked about like general lifters being too perfect, not going for muscle damage. We talked about strength athletes going too ugly and not worrying about being perfect enough. We talk about aesthetic athletes who have the right exercises. They have everything correct except for the way in which they're doing the exercise. Their technique within the exercise is not correct. Therefore, it's not getting the results that they want. So this happens to a lot of people, and it severely holds them back for long-term progression. So anybody doing anything the first, say, 6 to 12 months of training is going to get some results. But how do you progress after you've been in it for a year or 2 or 3? The only way to progress at that point, if you're going to do the exact same style of training, is to have your technique freaking perfect. So you'll see this all the time too. If someone will do, say, Olympic lifting, they'll kind of plateau at that. So then they'll get into powerlifting. They'll plateau at that. Then they get into a strength training. Aesthetic training. Then they'll plateau at that. Then they move into, something else, and they plateau at that. So instead of ever figuring out why they're plateauing, they just keep bouncing around. Whereas they need to just buckle down and work on their technique, and that's how it's going to push them through plateaus. So you even see this in CrossFit. So CrossFit, a lot of the focus is on getting something done as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, that absolutely reinforces bad technique. So whatever their strongest muscles are going to take over. Whatever their weak muscles are going to always be weak. So you see this all the time in CrossFit athletes. They're insanely front side dominant. So big quads, but no hamstrings and butt. Big front shoulders, but no real good lat development. And they almost have a forward hunched over type build because they're so damn tight in their chest and front delts. So you'll see this. They might have pretty good upper back due to like the stress of Olympic lifts, like cleans and snatches off the floor. So, but they're not going to have really great lats. They're not going to have good full physical development. So, and especially the glutes and hamstrings. So they'll go to the events, they'll do things, and they'll just blast through 1,000 miles an hour. They never really pay attention to what is the exact muscle doing the work, and are the muscles sharing the work. So you'll see like high rep deadlift competitions, they'll all be bitching and whining about their back hurting because their form is shit. So they're not lifting it with their glutes and hamstrings. They're just quad blasting it off the floor, locking out their lower back, dropping the bar. Quad blasting off the floor, locking out their lower back, dropping the bar. So they're going to see impaired progress due to bad technique, even in CrossFit. So this is a universal thing, is paying attention to the quality of technique. So your technique, how well you do what you do, is overwhelmingly going to be the limiting factor, okay, for long-term progress. So recently, I watched a video. There was a very advanced level, like elite level world record holder who was talking to another world record holder about strength training. Okay, and they were going over deadlifts. And the one was kind of just watching the other lift. So the person, we'll just say, basically anyhow. So one person did 3 reps of the deadlift, and the other one looked at him and they said, like, oh, they're different. And they go, what do you mean? They said all 3 of those were different. And they were talking about being like their body positioning, their tilt positioning, and their sensations of in the foot. So were they pressurized through the front of the foot, the midfoot, or rear foot? And even within their arch, were they on the front of the arch or the back of the arch? So they were talking about consistency. So these are people who, it was a woman who can deadlift over 500 pounds, a guy who can deadlift over 900 pounds. And they were not talking about, like how much weight they were lifting, the percentages of their 1 rep max. They weren't talking about special tricks or any kind of other bullshit. Entirely what they talked about was the consistency of technique. So if I want to be a guy who deadlifts 900 pounds, if I want to be a girl who deadlifts 500 pounds, what is going to limit me from that? It's going to be my technique. Can I lift things perfect with the exact muscles and pathway that I want to best display my strength? So technique being perfect or not, okay, being not perfect enough is going to be a limiter in strength training. Technique in terms of muscle firing, body positioning, paying attention to whether you want your back versus your biceps, your upper chest versus your delts or triceps. That stuff is absolutely important for aesthetic improvements. So technique of what you do in aesthetics will make or break your results. Technique in what you do in strength will make or break your results. Technique in CrossFit, technique in just generally health, like general health, not being a fat ass, just trying to be regular health, okay? All of it is going to be a limitation. So, what are you doing to improve your technique? Are you addressing technique? If you're coming into the gym and you're exercising, that is not addressing technique. That is being busy, being active. What are you actively doing to know if what you're doing is correct? You might believe it is, but how do you know? Okay? If I'm going to work on the engine of my car, I'm not just going to start taking shit apart and figure it out as I go. That is a pretty dumb model. So why do we bring that into lifting weights and exercise? Oh, it'll get better over time. I'm sure I'm doing it fine. I'm doing it good enough. Good enough? What the hell? It's like the words of death, good enough. Okay? That's like the same phrasing of like, I'll do it tomorrow. No, you won't. Tomorrow is never today. Tomorrow is always tomorrow. Good enough is bullshit. How do you know you're doing it right? How do you know you're getting better? Okay? There are a million technique videos on YouTube nowadays. So if you want to get better at squat, deadlift, or bench, like a strength-based lift, even heck regular stuff like lat pull downs, okay, pull-ups, chest press, chest flies, bicep curls, tricep extensions. There are a million videos on YouTube. Go look them up, like watch what they're doing, listen to what they say. Record yourself doing it on your smartphone, okay? And then compare what you look like to what they look like in the video. That's one of the ways I learned. And I did it for years and years and years. So I started lifting weights when I was 16. And this month I'll be turning 36. I'm an old man. So I'm going to have 20 years of lifting in. And still, 20 years into this, I will still watch a how to deadlift video, okay? Because I want to make sure I'm doing things right. Maybe they're going to say something I hadn't heard before. You never know. If I don't watch the video, I will never get better. If I watch the video and they just say the exact same things I already knew, great, that's cool. I get reconfirmed in what I knew. But it's never a waste of time, okay? So always, always, always recognize that videos are available to you. You can go search them out. There's even books. So I've talked about in a recent podcast, one of my favorite books is The Strength Training Anatomy Workout 2 by